Welcome to episode 4 of my podcast. I'm Manjit called Ruprai and I'm a narcissistic abuse recovery therapist. This is a story about a woman who contacted me to share her story. Her name has been changed to protect her identity and whoever else I may mention. I'm going to call her Nikki and her friend Palm. Trigger warning, this story mentions domestic violence. Nikki and Palm connected on a dating site. Nikki had been dating for some time with no luck. She felt tired and exhausted with talking to so many men and having the same conversation over and over. She had a small break from dating but decided to give online dating another go. Palm was a lawyer and his profile sounded interesting. He looked handsome and was well dressed in his profile picture. Nikki decided to like his profile and express an interest in him and hoped he would connect with her. After all, she had paid for a membership and wanted to make the most of it in the hope she finds the man of her dreams. Within a few minutes, Palm liked Nikki and a message came through straight away asking her how she is doing and that he would like to get to know her. Instead of chatting through the dating site, Palm asked Nikki for her number and she quickly gave it to him. After all, he was a lawyer and he looked nice. Over the next few days, Palm and Nikki engaged in conversation and they seemed to connect well. He had been divorced and told Nikki that his previous marriage had only lasted a few months. The breakup had been heartbreaking for him as it had ended very suddenly. He told Nikki he had struggled emotionally to accept the breakup at first and it had taken him some time to get over it. Nikki didn't want to pry too much, so she held back asking too many questions, but Palm voluntarily told Nikki that his ex-wife had got cold feet once they had got married, and she began to distance herself until she moved back home, asking for a divorce. Nikki felt sorry for him and appreciated his honesty. She believed him and he sounded genuinely broken. There were some men she had met online and they had been dishonest with her, either telling her they were divorced when they were married or had separated and were not. She liked his honesty and felt he had shown his vulnerability. Nikki began to build trust in Palm and shared some of her own dating experiences with him. He also mentioned his experiences and they were not perfect. Palm worked a lot of unsociable hours due to his work schedule and would message Nikki and call her as often as they could talk. They seemed to be getting along great and she could see potential in something developing, but also felt guarded. She sent a message one afternoon just to say hi and asked how his day is going. Minutes later, her phone beeped and he sent her a joke message, but she did not get it. Nikki had a dry sense of humour and did not often understand jokes. She texted him back and said she does not get it, but tried to engage in conversation. To Nikki's surprise, Palm texted her back and said, "Just forget it." She didn't reply again after that, but hours later Palm texted her back and said, "We are not getting anywhere and he feels we are two different people and that he would like to remain friends with her." Nikki had been friend-zoned. She felt disappointed. She had felt optimistic in something developing with Palm since speaking to him over the last week, and she had enjoyed getting to know him, but now felt let down that she has to start over again on that dreaded dating site. They hadn't met, so she wasn't too attached, but she felt disappointed. She would get over it. It was no big deal. The thought of going back on the dating sites exhausted Nikki. She had tried dating so many times and it was becoming disappointing and boring with having the same conversation with someone over and over. She was tired of being lied to as well. Nikki didn't hear from Palm for a while, but then he began to text her again. She was surprised. He told Nikki he would like to be friends with her as she's a great girl, but he felt they were two different people to date. He would text and call her every now and again, and she would text him too. She didn't mind being friends with him, and she felt they got on even better as friends. Nikki didn't have a lot of male friends, so this was quite nice to just really be herself. Over the next few weeks, their friendship grew, and Palm was calling Nikki more and more, and sometimes they would be talking for hours at a time. She would even ask him questions about dating and what to do if a man behaves in a certain way towards her and what that meant. It was nice to get a male perspective of things. Nikki realised that Palm was very confident and had a huge ego. He spoke about himself a lot and how brilliant he is. He would even make comments that he is the most good-looking guy around. He would tell her that there were so many girls head over heels for him. Nikki felt relieved they were only friends, as she could not see herself being in a relationship with him. He was too full of himself, and his ego was too big for her liking. He had this high energy about him, and he would often sound quite hyper. As a friend, she could tolerate this, but in a relationship it would have been too much. She no longer felt disappointed that this didn't progress into a relationship. After talking for about a month and their friendship growing, Palm suggested they meet. Nikki quickly agreed. After all, they were just friends. They spoke to one another all the time, and she felt it would be nice to actually meet him in person. She suggested she could travel to his hometown. She booked a hotel, although Palm lived by himself and he offered for her to stay with him. Nikki felt it would be better for her to just get a hotel. She would feel more comfortable and safe. Nikki and Palm arranged to meet at a bar after she checked into her hotel room. They got along in person just as much as they had on the phone, and Nikki thought he was a handsome man in person too, and he looked like he took a lot of pride in his appearance. As the conversation flowed, they laughed and joked, but she realised they had drank a fair bit. As the evening progressed and they continued to drink, Nikki realised there was a different side to Palm. He made a lot of inappropriate comments to the many women that were in the bar. He either said they had great legs, a nice body, or that they were overweight or ugly. Yes, he said they were ugly and overweight in very direct words. Nikki was shocked and embarrassed that he could say something like that, and at the back of her mind, she was thinking what he could be thinking about her. She wasn't unattractive, but she felt that she was average looking. She had put on some weight over the last year or so, which affected her confidence. No one should be devaluing anyone, she thought. As the evening continued and the drinks flowed, Palm seemed to become more comfortable and direct. He even called Nikki fat and said she is too short. He directly told her that she is not his type and was too simple, but if she was more attractive and slimmer, he would consider being with her. Nikki was shocked that someone would be so mean and say this. She had been through an emotionally rocky time and had started to comfort eat. She felt she wasn't that big, but had put on some weight over the last year or so. She felt shocked at his level of ego and obnoxiousness that he could call her fat and pretty much unattractive, and wasn't afraid to criticise the many women that passed them. They decided to call it a night. It was 2 a.m, and all she heard was Palm talking about himself. She was tired and wanted to go back to her hotel and sleep. Palm didn't ask her a lot of questions, but was happy to talk about himself. Nikki was even more relieved that they agreed to just be friends. To be honest, in hindsight, Nikki should not have even been his friend. Despite finding him egotistical and arrogant, she felt she could be honest with him. She was glad things did not progress into a relationship because he was really not her type and his personality was a little overbearing at times. Nikki began to feel a lack of confidence in herself. On one hand, she was glad Palm had told her she was fat, but on the other hand, she felt hurt. No one had been so brutally honest with her before. Nikki decided to join a gym. Perhaps other men that she had dated these last few months felt she looked fat too and didn't want to pursue things with her. Nikki started going to the gym 4 times a week and changed her eating. She knew she needed to curb her eating habits, which had changed this last year. She told Palm that she had joined a gym and he was happy for her and very encouraging. Nikki travelled to Palm's hometown fairly often to see him, but one weekend he invited her to stay at his. She felt comfortable as they had been talking for a few months now and had already met a few times. Although he was rude and inappropriate at times, he was not her boyfriend, so she could tolerate him. He had a clean home and everything looked immaculate. She soon realised he had a temper. She went to grab a tissue. He snapped and shouted at her and told her she did not put the tissue box away as she had found it, and she left it in a different position on the table. She was too afraid to touch anything after that. They had a few drinks, and Palm began to tell her about his ideal partner and that he wanted his future wife to have the perfect body. Not fat, beautiful hair, wear designer clothes, and be extremely pretty. She also had to be able to cook and have his dinner ready for when he came home from work. As she listened in disbelief, she realised he was a shallow man and very superficial. He was misogynistic. As she spent more time with him, she was glad she was not in a relationship with him. Despite his ego and arrogance, she could tolerate him in small doses. Often he would call her for about 3 hours at a time, talking about himself and how amazing he is. She listened and would sometimes advise him as a friend to treat women with respect. Often he would become irritated and they would have a fallout for something he would disagree with. He dated often and would tell Nikki that he would just use the girls for sex and ghost them if they didn't meet his needs. The more she learned about Palm, the more she was relieved they were friends. This also made her think about perhaps what men were thinking. She didn't want to think that all men were obnoxious and misogynistic, but it made her think long and hard about this when she was dating. She began to question his friendship, and she felt that if he treated her badly, imagine how he treated his girlfriends. She also questioned in her head whether he treated his wife like this, and she had had enough and walked out after a very short marriage. One day Palm told Nikki he had met someone online. She worked in the medical profession. Her name was Ruby. This would be his latest short-term girlfriend. He told Nikki he likes Ruby, but then he would change his mind and say he will never be serious about her. He dated Ruby for a few months and things seemed to be getting serious. Ruby told Palm she sees potential for a future and really likes him, but he told her he no longer wanted to be with her. Ruby was deeply upset as he had not given her a valid reason and quickly broke up with her. Ruby was devastated as she had spent months trying to get to know Palm. Nikki told Palm he had strung Ruby along. She told him that was not nice, so he fell out with Nikki and didn't speak to her for a few days. She didn't bother calling him either. It was not nice what he had done. Days later, he contacted Nikki and accepted what he did was not nice, but he didn't seem too remorseful. Palm had many relationships like this, and he would sleep with the many women and discard them like they meant nothing. He was cruel and mean. Nikki was not afraid to call him out on his behaviour, but then he would stop talking to her, but then would always come back. Over the months, Nikki had lost some weight and was feeling more confident in herself. She felt she had got her body back and was finding herself again. Palm suggested they go away together one weekend. Palm liked a good night out and liked to drink, so he suggested a place where there was a good nightlife. Nikki booked herself a hotel room and travelled to where they would be meeting. Nikki looked at herself in the mirror and she felt she looked good for a change in her black dress and high heels. She sprayed her favourite Chanel perfume and smiled at herself. It wasn't often she smiled at her reflection. Palm knocked on her hotel door and commented straight away that she has lost lots of weight and looks really good. She thanked him and they headed out for drinks and food. Palm had told Nikki many months ago that he had liked a girl for the last few years and that he wanted to meet her tonight as she was in the area. She had heard of all his dating stories and how much he liked this girl. Nikki was okay with this as they were just friends. As the night progressed, Nikki didn't realise she had drank so much. They hadn't eaten much and Palm and Nikki kept on buying one another drinks. Nikki had got a little carried away with drinking as she hadn't felt this good about herself for a long while. Palm received a message from the girl he liked and they decided to have one more round of drinks before they headed to meet her. Nikki felt drunk but was still in control at the time. At the back of her head, she was telling herself no more drinks. Do not drink anymore. That last round of drinks and shots had done it. As soon as they stepped out to go to the other bar, the air hit Nikki. The last thing she remembered was walking and giggling in a drunken state. She lost control. She couldn't remember anything after that. The next thing Nikki knew, she woke up in A&E the next morning. She felt panic as she slowly opened her eyes and wondered where the heck she was. She was alone on a bed. A nurse came to her and told Nikki she had been found by someone passed out on the floor and then called an ambulance. She felt embarrassed and looked down at the nurse in shame. Nikki's body ached. This must be because of the way she had fallen. As the nurse let her gather herself, she sympathetically told her that she looked so nice and it is a shame she has ended up here. The nurse was compassionate and told her to be careful going home and that she can call her a taxi. Although conscious, Nikki's head was spinning and she just wanted to be in bed. She waited for her taxi. Suddenly her mind went blank and she couldn't remember which hotel she was staying in. She felt panic and didn't even know if she had her hotel key card. She still had her handbag, thankfully, and she checked the side pocket and hoped she had something to tell her where she was staying. She felt the plastic key card and found a piece of paper with her room number on it. But she had no phone. She looked in her handbag and went running to the nurse who told her that these were her only items she came in with. She made it back to the hotel and asked them if she could use their phone. She dialed her number and a female answered her phone. Nikki was relieved that someone had answered. The woman told Nikki her phone had been handed in at the bar. Nikki needed some sleep, so she arranged to collect it later that day. Her head was spinning as she slumped on the bed. Never had she experienced something like this. There were so many thoughts going through her head. Where was Palm? Why was she alone? He had abandoned her and left her all by herself. Luckily, nothing worse had happened to her, but Nikki dreaded to think that she could have been robbed, kidnapped, beaten, or sexually assaulted. Palm eventually contacted Nikki when she was on the way home. He did not remember the night very well. He actually got annoyed with her for not ringing him sooner. Palm told him she had lost her phone and had only got it back. Palm asked where she had disappeared to. She told him quietly she had ended up in A&E. Palm laughed at her and was unsympathetic. He actually told her to watch her drinking. He quickly went on to talk about himself and what an amazing time he had had with the girl. She expressed her anger with him and told Palm he had left her alone and didn't even bother looking for her. She told him he was a terrible friend and anything could have happened to her. Nicky put the phone down and didn't take his calls. Several days later, Palm called Nicky again and apologised. They spoke for a while and he said he was sorry for leaving her and said he missed her, and to be honest, she missed him too. So she forgave him. They had been friends for a couple of years, and in that time he had dated many women. But Palm would still often say that if Nicky was taller and prettier, he would date her. She made it clear to him that she is only his friend and nothing more. He would try to cross that boundary and would often ask her to marry him. She was unsure if he was joking, but each time she declined his offer. She could not see herself being with him. She questioned many times in her head why his first wife had left him. She could only imagine he flirted with others in front of her and found his personality overbearing. Life became quite busy for Nicky, as she had also met someone, and she had less time to meet and speak to Palm. He became jealous and kept telling her they should get married and they should give a relationship a go. Nicky laughed it off each time and said it would be a disaster as she knows too much about him. Plus there were a lot of things she didn't like about him. Other times he would say that she's the only girl he has ever been honest with and feels he could tell her everything. Nicky always just laughed off his advances. He had this horrible dark side to him, and she really didn't like it. Out of the blue, Palm one evening told her he is going abroad to get married. Nicky was shocked and didn't believe him at first, but when he said he was serious, she was really pleased and happy for him. He was going in 3 weeks' time with his family. Nicky needed a break from Palm, as she was finding the friendship was becoming too much, and it was taking up too much time, so she was quite glad he would be away. She also needed to invest time in getting to know the man she was talking to. Palm was quite negative with her speaking to someone else and often told her he will cancel his trip abroad if she agreed to give a relationship a try with him. Nicky told him it was better they just stay friends. A few weeks passed and Palm went abroad. He phoned Nicky about a week later and said he has met someone and is getting married. She was surprised as he had only been there for a week. How can he find someone and get married so quickly? As a concerned friend, she asked him if he was sure. Not because she wanted to get married to him, but because she was shocked he was getting married so quickly. It can take several months or years to get to know someone. She suggested they could get engaged, and then he could travel abroad after a few months to legally get married. That way they can get to know one another. He asked Nicky to consider marrying him, and that he had made a mistake for not giving things a go with her. But she said they would not get along. She knew there could not be a lasting relationship. He pestered her over and over with how he had made a mistake and that she is the only one for him. He once again asked her to consider this again, or he is really going to get married. He was giving her an ultimatum. She didn't agree and wasn't going to think about it either. She just didn't feel that way about him. Nicky didn't hear from Palm again until he got back to England, and he told her all about his wedding. She didn't think he was serious, but she was surprised he really did get married. He said he is happy with his decision and that his wife is really nice. He told Nicky his wife is a bit overweight, but he didn't mind. Nicky was a bit shocked to hear this because he'd always said he didn't like curvy girls and told Nicky the first time they met that if she was slimmer, he would have dated her. Nicky didn't say anything. She congratulated him and said she was really happy for him. Nikki and Palm did not speak for a while, as she felt it was best that they speak less, as he was now married and she was dating and getting to know someone. Nikki thought once Palm's wife arrives, it would be better they get used to talking less. Palm phoned Nikki again a few days later, and this time she answered the call. Palm told Nikki in panic that he thought he'd made a mistake and shouldn't have got married. He told her his new wife has been ignoring most of his calls, and she would call him every so often when it suited her. He told Nikki she was very hot and cold with him and sounded like she was hiding something. Nikki tried to reassure him and that he needs to give it time, and perhaps it is expensive to call from abroad and the time difference has an impact, but Palm seemed to be having a lot of doubts. This carried on for months. Palm was very up and down and doubted his decision. Nikki supported him, but it was becoming draining. Sometimes he would snap at her and ask her to stop trying to be positive about his situation. Other times he would say that he should have just married Nikki instead, and he would never be in this situation. She brushed it off. Things were very up and down, and often Palm would be depressed. Nikki was becoming drained, as she found she was consoling him for most of the day and not having time for her own relationship. This was having an impact on Nikki, so she would sometimes ignore his calls. A few months later, Palm's wife arrived and he said things were a little better. He said he will give it time for her to settle in and get comfortable in her new home with him. Palm and Nikki spoke less and less, and she let him get on with his life. One day Palm rang Nikki from work in a distressed state and told her that he'd found out his wife has been saying bad things about him to his friends and family. Palm was really upset and said he'd really been trying to help his wife settle in and make friends, so he was shocked he would do something like this. Nikki tried to comfort Palm and said it might all be a misunderstanding. Palm rang Nikki again a few days later and told her that his wife had said she would like to go back home for a short break and then would come back to work things out. He was okay with this and felt the break would do them good. Palm rang a few days later to tell Nikki that he had dropped his wife off at the airport and everything seemed okay. She seemed happy when she left and things seemed to be better between them. She said she will call Palm when she reaches home to let him know she has arrived safely. Palm waited for a call, but he didn't get one. Days went by and Palm didn't hear from his wife. He checked the flight information and it had landed safely. So what had happened? Did she get into an accident on the way to her family home? So many thoughts went through Palm's mind, and he was getting worried. He phoned his wife's family, but no one was taking his calls. He didn't know what to do. Palm kept phoning and messaging in the hope that he will get a reply of his wife's whereabouts. A few days later, Palm received a call from a family member to say his wife didn't actually leave the country. After Palm dropped her off at the airport, she didn't board the flight and left to stay with some of her family members she had in another city. She said she didn't want any further contact with Palm or would not be coming back to him. Palm was devastated. He thought things were getting better when his wife left and a break would do them good, and he always thought she would come back. He didn't know what to do. He needed to speak to his wife to try and work things out. He asked the person who told him about his wife, but they refused to tell him where she was because she'd asked them not to tell Palm. She told them Palm has been violent towards her, but she didn't want to press charges. Palm was shocked as he said he'd never been violent towards her, and this has come out of the blue to him. Nikki does not know what the truth is, but she knows Palm has an angry streak. Palm had no way of getting in touch with his wife. Her phone number had changed, and he had no idea where she was, and no one would tell him. Palm waited weeks and months in the hope that his wife would get in touch with him, even if it wasn't to get back together, just to talk for some closure. But she never contacted him. He was distraught and shocked that he now has 2 failed marriages. He was angry and depressed and told Nick he thought his wife must have been having an affair with someone. That's why she left him. Nikki tried to support him as a friend as much as she could, but he was angry about the situation and took a lot of anger out on her. He devalued her often, calling her useless and saying that her job is not a career. He would shout at her on the phone if she said anything he didn't like or if she missed his calls. It's almost like he wanted her to be unhappy with him. She realised this was a toxic friendship, and as much as she wanted to support Palm for her well-being, she decided to end things. She needed to stop giving him so much of her time and to focus on herself. He even asked her to marry him, and he would become verbally abusive when she said no. One day they had a huge argument, and this was the final straw for Nikki. She couldn't continue this anymore. She had to cut this friendship off as it was getting her down. Nikki sent a message to Palm to explain that she wouldn't be taking any of his calls and it's best that they go their own ways, and wished him all the best for the future. Palm continued to call her for a little while after this, but Nikki didn't take any of his calls or responded to him. She eventually blocked him because she needed to focus on herself and to get on with her life. He was holding her back, and she didn't need this. The last she heard about Palm was that he had got a divorce, but Nikki didn't speak to Palm again. Sometimes friendships can be toxic too. It is not always in romantic relationships or families. Please like and share. If you have a story to tell, email me via my website. Thank you for tuning into this episode.